When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. Discussions about democracy often bring up the concept of the public sphere, a space where citizens engage in debate and shape public opinion. For many thinkers, the ideal public sphere is defined by equal access, where every individual has an opportunity to participate, free from coercion or unequal power. While this might sound theoretical, the concept has everyday relevance, from political discourse to our personal conversations and relationships. Think about a community meeting where residents are discussing a newly proposed park. In a true public sphere, all these voices in the community would carry kind of equal weight. Longtime homeowners are concerned about property values, and renters are advocating for more affordable houses, and small business owners are hoping for more foot traffic. They all have valid interests, but if the development company who wants the land that the park would be on sponsors the meeting, gives refreshments, controls the agenda, maybe promises people kickbacks for votes, the space loses all neutrality. When financial interests distort participation, the public sphere is compromised. This imbalance also appears in the workplace. Imagine a brainstorming session about workplace productivity, for example. Ideally, everyone, from new employees to managers, would contribute some insights without fear of retaliation, like they're not going to lose their job or not get promoted because they said something in the interests of a better meeting. But if only the highest ranking voices are taken seriously, innovation and idea sharing suffers. Equality of access in professional settings requires fostering an environment where questioning and constructive criticism are really welcome. After all, democracy doesn't just live in the voting booth or the chambers of government. It thrives wherever people gather to exchange ideas with mutual respect. I'm Michael Lee, Professor of Communication and Director of the Civility Initiative at the College of Charleston. Our guest on When We Disagree is Jermaine Johnson. Jermaine represents District 52 in the South Carolina House of Representatives. Originally from Los Angeles, Jermaine was a star basketball player in college before a multi-year career in the pros. His life is chronicled in the documentary, I Got Myself a Yard. Jermaine, tell us an argument story.
Oh, man. Well, first off, thank you for having me here this morning. Most people don't realize, or they haven't realized, that we are actually in the Bible Belt. So with us being in the Bible Belt and, down here in South Carolina, a lot of laws, family laws, were created in the 60s, 70s, 80s that were specifically geared toward making sure that women have the rights and they could take care of their families. The problem is now we're here in 2024 and times have changed. Women have been able to achieve education and employment opportunities and those types of things. But our laws have not been updated since, they were first established way back in the day. So myself and another representative, we introduced some legislation that would say that if you have a child with a woman and it turns out that woman actually deceived you and that child is not your child biologically, that you would be able to go to the judge and have your name taken off of the birth certificate. And that seems logical when you're saying, well, if I'm the father and I'm really not the father, and I was deceived and I want to take my name off this birth certificate, it should be done so.
So the current law prohibits
the current
men...
law. Yes, the current law prohibits you from taking your name off the birth certificate. Also in the South Carolina, currently, by the way the law is written, if you are the father of a child, a biological father of a child, but you are unmarried, you have zero rights to that child. That's the way. So a woman could take the child, move to Alaska, put you on child support, and you don't have any rights to see in that child.
Do you have to be married before the child is born? Can you be
Correct.
married after the fact?
You have to be married before the child is born, right? So if the child is born, let's say you are married. Let's say you are married and you have a child, but you find out that your wife cheated on you.
Okay.
By law, you are still the father of that child because you are married. So essentially, you could end up paying child support for a child that's not even your kid. And you would be stuck out of that.
Wow. Okay.
So I said, I think it would be logical that we kind of change some of these laws. We say, hey, let's kind of allow a man who finds out that he's not the father of this child biologically because he was lied to
Right.
be able to remove his name from the birth certificate.
Yeah.
All right. You and I think that's normal, but apparently the people who were against it did not want to see that come to pass.
Let's talk about that.
Okay, so this is where the disagreement comes in.
All right. Yeah.
So the disagreement was they believed that at some point the child's rights and the child's well-being should trump the adult's rights and the adult's well-being. And they called that bastardizing the child. The judge, I've heard the judge say that herself. She says, we don't want to bastardize the child.
Can we pause on that word for a second?
Yes.
What does that mean?
That's allowing a child to be growing up without a father or a parental figure.
The child has, through deception, a legal father.
Yes.
Who is not the child's biological father, but is, in the eyes of the law, the father.
Correct.
And then to remove that father, because the father is actually not the biological father, would be, in the eyes of the law, the bastardization.
The bastardization
of the child.
That's correct. And that is the way that the current law is currently operating. Now, me and myself and the people, the supporters of my legislation, were going into a back and forth debate with the other individuals who were saying, no, we can't. Like, when do we keep the child's well-being at the forefront of everything? Because if everybody wants the child to be have a healthy upbringing and have a good family environment, when is the child's rights going to trump the adult's rights? Because at some point you could have done something to not put yourself in that situation.
I guess my immediate question, just in terms of the bastardization argument, isn't it also in the child's best interest to have their father be their authentic father and not based on a lie or deception or subterfuge, and B, or two, isn't putting a child in a deceitful family situation potentially nuclear and also bad for the child's interests?
And that's what some of the argument that I stated myself. So what they were saying was that, we at least have to put some sort of a time frame in there to say if a father says, for the first 5-6 years doesn't get a DNA test, or if he finds out and says, I'll just assume the responsibility. He just, with knowledge says, I'll go ahead and forget it all. I'll do that. Then we can't do it. So they were trying to say something, but they still killed the entire bill itself.
When was this?
This was last year.
So you introduced with a colleague in the House, in the South Carolina House, this legislation. It sounds like you consulted with judges too, but also South Carolina House members, and it was killed in a committee. It
was killed in a subcommittee, and they said, we would possibly bring it back, or we'd possibly talk about it. But of course, when they say that, it's not the truth. It's something to say to make it go away. And we are still sitting in the midst of a situation like this. Now, there's a big movement right now to kind of equalize the rights, because we know studies show that fathers, when they're involved in the lives of their children, that the success of a child, the outcomes are just fantastic. And even more so, a single father household can produce the same sort of results as a two-parent household. So we know that by statistics. But the problem is we're still operating on 1950, 1960, 1970s law, and we refuse to come up to modern times. Another situation that we need to change here. Did you know in the current law, they classify mixed race children as special needs?
Current South Carolina.
In the current South Carolina law, if you are of mixed race, you are considered special needs. And so I've got legislation that wants to change that, but we will not come up to current 2024 standards. And I'm trying to figure out why we continue to go back and forth about stuff that, is just obvious and needs to change.
Let's pause on the special needs thing, because I'm struggling to catch up a little bit with that one. What does that mean, both legally in terms of this mixed race child's classification, and as well as in the child's life? Does that mean the child is put into special schooling?
So what when they first created this law, it was, of course, in an antiquated time. It was way back, in the day. And they created it because they said kids who were mixed race were more hard to adopt them out, to find them families.
Yeah.
So they classify them as special needs in order to get them more governmental funding, some more support, some more resources.
Okay.
And they did it of that. But we know that in 2024, special needs is not special needs, maybe
Right.
special circumstances,
Sure.
maybe hard to adopt out, something like that would need to change. But the problem is it's still in the law as special needs classified with,
Yeah.
differently abled individuals.
Is this a similar situation where you've introduced legislation
Yes.
to try to get rid of this and it's been killed in a
And
subcommittee?
it's just sat in a closet somewhere and has not come up to be changed.
What's interesting, two things, and let's see if we can talk about both of them. One, it sounds like you're having a lot of conflict over antiquated law, but in terms of the back and forth arguments, this bastardization argument aside, there's not a ton of actual debate and disagreement. There's conflict, and this change you're trying to push is meeting with resistance, but a lot of that is happening behind closed doors. They're not going to air their arguments in favor of special needs designations or in favor of people being lied to about their parentage.
Right.
And put that in open debate. And so let's talk about that. And the second thing I want to get to eventually too is it sounds like a lot of the work that you're doing and frustrations you're finding being a South Carolina House representative is not just fighting against present political circumstances, polarization, the other party, this or that person who's tough to work with, but fighting against history and the force of history on the present.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that first one first, if you don't mind. All this stuff is conflict, but it's happening behind closed doors. How does that?
Right.
That's got to be really frustrating.
It's extremely frustrating because the conflict, a lot of the debate that you all see on TV, this debate has already happened behind closed doors in somebody's office or somebody's car or on a phone call or something like that. And I discovered that after I had got elected. That the decisions have already been made. They've been made behind closed doors. People have already argued and negotiated what they're going to allow inside of this bill, or whatever it is. So when you see these big, long speeches from the well, or you see these big things on TV, you see these big arguments, that's for show. It's all for show. It's all theater. It's all theatrics. They've already agreed to allow you to speak for 15 minutes or 10 minutes, and they've already said, you know what? At this many bills that are introduced, we're going to cut off debate and we're going to invoke cloture, and then we're going to do this. Like all this has already been discussed. So when you have the subcommittee meetings, the committee meetings, they have already determined whether they're going to pass this out, whether or not they're going to change it, whether they're going to introduce another amendment. All that's already been there. And these debates that happen behind closed doors, those are the serious ones. So I've had these debates with these people behind closed doors about different things, including this one. We talk about the fathers and their rights and everything. So these are some things that we have to change.
And was this something that you became aware of once you were elected and you were in the House, that there were these theatrical speeches that were really just for the cameras, and that there were these debates that happened that had basically predetermined what was going to be allowable as legislation?
Yes.
So there has to be this sort of like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington disillusionment moment where you presume you're getting involved in something where everybody equally cares about the outcomes for their constituencies, for their states, for the country, and then is willing to do the research and political grinding to make sure that the proper legislation gets through. And part of that is a debating process where you and I, as people who disagree, sit down and hash out like where we can meet in the middle or who's really right and who's really wrong, and have that in public and be accountable for our words. But instead, it's a closed door, untransparent, unaccountable kind of a system. What was that like when you made that realization?
Oh man, my God. It's funny because, I'm a Democrat, right? So I'm a Democrat in the state house. And I found this out when two other Democrats, I'm not going to name their names, but when two other Democrats stole a bill from me. So I had introduced the bill when my freshman term up in there, and they went and kind of hijacked the bill because they wanted the credit for this bill that I had introduced. And they said, if you don't pass this, we're going to force you to pass it. And if you ever pass anything else on the House side, when it comes to the Senate side, we'll make sure it doesn't pass. And these are Democrats that are telling me this. And this is when I realized that it's not a Republicans versus Democrats thing. It's not a, we're going to be on we're going to be on TV and argue thing. This is a long-term relationships type thing that we all know what's going on behind closed doors, and you don't know what happens until you're actually out there and you're up there, in the know-how, So it creates so much conflict.
There is the system, it sounds like it works in terms of a lot of relationships, seniority, glad handing
Yep.
behind closed doors, but there's this theater of openness.
Right.
Is there any advantage to the way that system works now versus a system that was much more public debate, accountability, almost like a jury trial, where like I give my case for somebody's guilt or innocence, you give your public case, and then there is a set of deliberations via a judge or a jury.
Right. And, there is some advantage because when you truly get to know somebody, you understand who they are, their character, that type of stuff. They truly do want to work with you. It doesn't matter if it's, Republican, Democrat, Independent, they will find a way to assist you. I've gotten lots of assistance from the Republican Party to help my constituents. And, that's stuff that doesn't go in front of a debate. It doesn't happen like that. These are people that are assisting me. But when your messaging on the Republican side is so good, or when your messaging on the Democratic side is so good, you can publicly demonize somebody, and people who are not involved, they don't see the human side of Democrats, Republicans, or Independents, and that relationship that we have. All they see is what they see in TV and the media, and they assume that is Bible, or that's the truth, and that's what's actually happening. And they don't see us hanging out at each other's houses, having drinks, going to each other's kids' birthday parties, and that type of stuff. And the messaging is just too darn good at this point to where there's a supermajority in the House and the Senate. But a lot of those guys in the House and the Senate didn't want to see their Democratic friends lose.
Right.
So it's like,
but they had to appear.
But they had to appear like they wanted to see him lose.
In this circumstance, and this is transitioning into that second question I was talking about your war, not against Republicans or other Democrats, but your fight against history. What I'm hearing in this case is that at least the two bills that you've had conflicts about that you've introduced here on the show, this argument about deceitful fatherhood and quote unquote bastardization, this issue about the reclassification of mixed race children not as special needs, legally speaking. To say it seemed like no-brainer bipartisan kinds of issues. It's hard for me to I try to put myself in the position of the person you're arguing against on this show and understand the world as they see it. And sometimes I run up against some difficulty trying to do that, and I'm finding myself struggling to be articulate for a different side. So just to say that. And so in this case, it feels like this is such a clear no-brainer issue, such an obvious bipartisan issue. Who on the other side, or even on your own side, could oppose these things? And so this is not really even an argumentative idea war like taxes or something like that would be. This is just a war for war's sake, just fighting to fight, it sounds like. Is that correct?
But that's how it feels. That's how it feels because it is such a no-brainer. To me, it's a no-brainer, to say, hey, if I've been deceived, and in case in point, so I had somebody who came to that committee to testify, and he was a good friend of mine, and he was with a woman, and they weren't married, and she ended up being pregnant. She told him that she was pregnant, so he ended up marrying her. He married her because he wanted to do the right thing. She was pregnant with his child. So fast forward, the kid's born. They end up breaking up. He ends up taking care of the kid. Like, he's got the kid with him. He raised the kid for like the first 6-7 years of the kid's life. The mom comes back into the child's life. She tries to take the kid from him. So she ends up, she takes the kid, gives the kid back. So he's getting visitation, and he's trying to figure out how to get custody of his kid. So his current fiance was trying to help him with the DNA testing, so they can establish the paternity, so he can get the child. So they do a DNA test, find out the kid's not his. So he's raising this kid that is not his. He's on child support. He's paying child support for this kid. He's got back pay of child support. So he's going in and out of jail. He's in and out of jail because now he's refusing to pay child support for a kid that has been proven to not be his. The judge knows this kid is not his. The mom knows this kid is not his. Everybody knows this kid is not his. But yet he is still being forced to pay child support for a kid who is not his. And he is upset. He is mad about the situation. So he came and testified up to talk about this. So he had to go. I mean, it took him about two and a half years to have attorneys fighting back and forth to finally get him released from child support. I mean, but think about it. He doesn't get any of that money back from the child support he had to pay. He doesn't get anything back. He doesn't get none of his time back. He doesn't get anything back. And with child support, the way child support is set up, you get up to a year for every single case that you have in South Carolina. So if you have 2 kids by 2 women, you're going to jail for 2 years consecutively. And you come out. They say don't miss a payment of child support. One payment is every 2 weeks. You miss a payment, you don't find a job in those couple of weeks. You miss those payments, you're back in jail for another year. Wow. And it's a cycle that you end up going to jail for life based on child support.
And so in those circumstances, to get to the conflict in the state house, it seems to me like, again, this is such a difficult argument to defend. Like, who's going to stand on the other side and hear that story and say, well, this is what justice looks like. And so then the question becomes, what are we fighting about?
Because
and why are we fighting?
Yeah, but that's because that's the platform of the other side. The Republican Party they call themselves like the family of values, right? I mean, or the party of values and families and morals and that type of stuff. So when you have that there, they're saying, well, it doesn't matter about the man. It's all about women and children. It's all about women and children. And this goes back to us being where? The Bible Belt.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also hard for me to get into the mind of this standard family values Republican and say that they would be supportive of lying about parentage, period. So
you would think that.
You would think that. And so then this is where it comes to the final point, and we can close here. We're talking about relationships. We're talking about closed door, quote unquote, debates and theatrical speeches that have already been scripted in advance that are strictly for the cameras, the show, the theater of it all. We're talking about partisan polarities between you as a Democrat, Republicans, and you and other Democrats, frankly. But we're also talking about laws that are on the books that were written in very antiquated times. And this is two instances in which you find yourself at war with South Carolina's history, the history of the Bible Belt, as you put it. And I imagine a lot of these laws are still on the books in places that are not in the Bible Belt, too.
Right.
Talk about the force of history. You're fighting this fight against another party, against your own party, but you're also fighting from 50, 60, 70 years ago whenever these laws were put on the books.
Right. You know, I talk about this stuff all the time, and I tell my friends and colleagues, I say, how naive are we to believe that things should have changed so drastically right now, when really these people who created these laws are still in power and still alive. You know, if you want to know, what it was like when it was hard for African Americans to vote, you don't have to go into a history book. I can call my mom right now. I can call my uncle right now. You know, they can tell me what it was like when they really couldn't vote. So, you know, the issue that is that we have not come to grips and come to terms with the fact that reality, we have not gotten so far away from these historical times, you know, and the people who are still in power, they're still referring to people as colored. They're still referring to people as this or that or whatever. We're still in the same times. So they still have these same beliefs, even though, you know, some of it has changed. Yeah. A lot of people still have they're still looking at the same view with the same, you know, color tint in their eyes. Yeah. You know, and we have to realize that, you know, I tell people all the time, I'm not fighting for myself. I'm not fighting for my children. I'm fighting for my grandchildren because I believe one day my grandchildren won't have to see some of this stuff and we'll be far enough removed from this, you know, this crazy time that we're in right now that things will actually change and they will be a little bit different. They will be more acceptable for all people who are out here in the world. So I'm fighting with the fact that I love history. I absolutely love the civil rights movement. I absolutely love it. I mean, I live this stuff. You know, Maya Angelou, I've got one of her quotes tattooed on my arm. You know, so I mean, I absolutely love this stuff. And I think we have to acknowledge that history literally is still currently the present.
Right. Yeah, that's the old Faulkner quote. The past is not dead. It's not even past.
Yep.
And final question, you were talking about history. You were also talking about your hope for the future, but you were also talking about some folks' naivete about how far we've really come. I'm going to give you a sentiment that I've heard a lot about over the past 8 years or so and just sort of get your reaction to it. When something that folks consider to be backwards or monstrous or antiquated happens, and you can just think of whatever you think of, and we can all think of things that have happened where we think the following thought, which is, how can we still be living like this in 2020 or 2022 or now 2024, almost 2025? What's your sense of that? Is that because we're naive enough and we've convinced ourselves that we've come a lot further than we really have? Is that an honest assessment that the world has really changed and now you and I can sort of be blown away that mixed race children can be legally considered to be special needs? Because how could that just be the case in this year and time? What's your sense of how could this be happening in 2024, 2025?
Well, I completely understand how this could be happening in 2024 or 2025. Yeah. But also, you know, two things can be true. I believe we have come a very, very long way. I mean, My grandfather who was the last living Buffalo soldier in America. He was. I mean, we have history in the family, so he at some point could not even go into a restaurant, and sit down and have a meal, after serving his country. But now we have things like that. We have African Americans leading military bases and things like that. We have them, getting acknowledgments, rewards, and awards and things like that. So we have come a long way. But when you look at people like President Joe Biden, who is 84, 85 years old, somewhere around 82, something like that, 82 years old. He was literally part of that time way back in the 1960s, 70s. We have Reverend Al Sharpton, who's still a part of, he was with Martin Luther King, Jesse Jackson. These guys, Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, even Donald Trump, all these people were still there. Mitch McConnell, these people have been in power forever, forever. They were literally there when the civil rights was going on, So with the stuff that they have changed from the civil rights up to 2024, just imagine the progression that we're going to make after they're gone. When these are the people who are literally living through this era. I got into a back and forth with somebody who was in his 70s, and I said, man, it's not my generation that created this mess. It was your generation. He was like, well, it wasn't my generation either. It wasn't your generation. You're in the 70s. He was like, but he was saying it was generation before his.
Right.
And it continues to get passed on. Yeah. And I believe that, it'll be the next 2 or 3 generations that we're really going to see the most drastic change, because we won't be living through the eyes of the people who literally created the mess that we're in.
Jermaine, thank you so much for being on When We Disagree.
Oh, man, appreciate y'all having me.
When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.